The cigarette arcs through the spotlight. It tumbles end over end, a tiny ember falling through 14,500 held breaths. The smoke trails behind it like a dying comet. The spotlight catches it once, twice, and then it disappears into the darkness of the third row. A woman screams. Frank Sinatra's face goes white. His hands clench at his sides. His jaw tightens so hard you can hear his teeth grinding from 20 feet away. And Dean Martin, the man this entire tour was supposed to save, just takes another sip from his glass and mumbles 4 words into the microphone. How long I've been on. The Oakland Coliseum isn't silent because of awe. It isn't silent because of shock. It is silent because 14,500 people are watching a man self-destruct in real time. But what Dean whispered to himself as he watched that cigarette fall, those 4 words that nobody in the audience heard but everyone on that stage understood, would become the epitaph of the greatest reunion that never was. Because grief doesn't negotiate with applause. Roberto Bobby Marchetti had been mixing sound at the Oakland Coliseum for 19 years. He had balanced Sinatra's voice against a 40-piece orchestra. He had made Streisand sound like an angel. He had kept the Stones from blowing out the speakers. But he had never seen anything like this. He was sitting at the mixing board, 50 feet from the stage, watching Dean Martin's face on the monitor, close enough to see the exact moment the legend gave up. To understand what happened that night in Oakland, you have to go back exactly 1 year, to a different March 21st, to a mountain in California, to the day Dean Martin's soul left his body. March 21st, Dean Paul Martin, pilot, tennis champion, actor, and the only person who ever truly knew Dean Martin, flew his F-4 Phantom into the side of Mount San Gorgonio. The weather had been clear. The visibility had been perfect. The mountain had been exactly where it always was. He was 35 years old. When Dean got the phone call, he didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. He didn't collapse. He just hung up the phone, walked to his bedroom, closed the door, and didn't come out for 3 days. Gene knocked. No answer. His manager called. No answer. Frank called 17 times. No answer. On the 3rd day, the door opened. But the man who emerged wasn't Dean Martin anymore. It wasn't Dino. It wasn't the king of cool. It was a ghost wearing Dean Martin's face, a body going through the motions of being alive. Frank Sinatra watched his best friend disappear. For months he tried everything. Phone calls, visits, jokes, nothing worked. Dean would nod, smile that famous smile, and then his eyes would drift somewhere else, somewhere Frank couldn't follow. I think it would be great for Dean, Frank told Sammy Davis Jr. over drinks at Chasen's. Get him out, get him moving. For that alone it would be worth doing. A tour, 29 cities, the 3 of them together again, the Rat Pack, one last time. Frank believed applause could heal anything. Frank was wrong. The kid from Steubenville had learned early how to bury pain behind a punchline. The steel mills had taught him that. You work, you smile, you never let them see you bleed. But some graves don't stay closed, and some pain doesn't care how many standing ovations you've received. In 3 months Dean Martin would stand on that Oakland stage. In 3 months he would throw that cigarette. But first they had to rehearse. The rehearsal studio in Burbank smelled like old carpet and stale coffee. The lights were hot. The air conditioning was broken. Coffee cups littered every surface. It was supposed to feel like the old days. Sammy was electric, 62 years old and still moving like a man half his age. His voice was sharp. His timing was perfect. His feet never stopped moving, and when he hit his marks, it was like watching someone who had been born on a stage. Frank was solid, 72, a little heavier, a little slower, but still the voice, still the chairman. He stood at the microphone like he owned it because he did. And Dean was lost. He forgot lyrics to songs he had sung 1,000 times. He missed cues he had invented. He wandered to the wrong part of the stage like a man walking through someone else's dream. He looked at the lights like he was trying to remember where he was. That's Amor. The song he had sung at every show for 35 years came out wrong. The words slurred. The timing was off. He stopped halfway through the second verse and just stood there. Frank watched from the wings. His jaw tightened. His fingers drummed against his thigh. Something's wrong with our boy, Sammy whispered. Frank didn't answer. He just watched Dean stumble through the rest of the rehearsal like a man who had already given up. But Frank Sinatra didn't give up on people he loved. Not ever. He had saved Dean once before, back in 1952, when nobody in Hollywood would touch the washed-up crooner from Steubenville. He had put Dean in a movie. He had given him another chance. He would save him again. He was sure of it. The tour would fix everything. March 13, 1988, Oakland Coliseum Arena. The smell of popcorn and cigarette smoke. The sound of 14,500 voices murmuring in anticipation. Sold out. $40 a ticket. Sammy opened. Standing ovation before he even sang a note. He danced, he joked, he commanded that stage like he was born to stand on it. Then Dean. He climbed the stairs slowly, too slowly. His tuxedo was perfect. It was always perfect. But something underneath it wasn't right. He took a sip from his glass, apple juice, but nobody knew that, and squinted at the crowd. "How long I been on?" he mumbled into the microphone. The audience laughed. They thought it was the act, the drunk routine, the stumbling charm that had made him famous. They thought they were watching Dean Martin. They weren't. They were watching what was left of him. He sang "When You're Drinking." The crowd loved it. They clapped along. They didn't notice that his eyes were somewhere else, somewhere far away, somewhere on a mountainside in California. Then he switched to "Welcome to My World," and his voice didn't carry. The Oakland Coliseum wasn't the intimate showroom at the Sands. It wasn't the Copa Room. It was a cavern. 14,500 seats stretching into darkness. Dean's voice disappeared into that void. "Louder!" someone shouted from the back. The word echoed through the arena. Dean stopped singing. "Louder! Louder!" The chant spread, section by section, row by row, 14,500 people demanding more than he had left to give. Bobby Marchetti, sitting at the mixing board, saw something in Dean's eyes on the monitor. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was relief, like a man who had just been given permission to quit. And that's when Dean Martin reached into his pocket. What happened next took 11 seconds. 11 seconds that would end a tour. 11 seconds that would end an era. 11 seconds that Frank Sinatra would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. The cigarette was already lit. Dean had pulled it from his pocket like he had done 10,000 times before. The Zippo clicked. The flame caught the light, 14,500 people watching that tiny fire. He took one drag. Slow, deep. The ember glowed orange in the darkness. And then, without looking, without aiming, without caring, he flicked it. The cigarette arced through the spotlight. 9:47 p.m. It tumbled, end over end, a dying ember falling through the silence. The smoke trailed behind it like a ghost. It landed in the third row, near a woman in a red dress. She screamed. The whole arena went quiet. Bobby Marchetti counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. For 11 seconds nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 14,500 people frozen in place. Bobby's hand hovered over the faders. He had no idea what to do. Frank stood frozen in the wings. His face was white. His hands were clenched into fists. His eyes were locked on Dean, and Dean Martin just shrugged. Ain't that a kick in the head? 8 days later. Chicago. The Chicago Theater. 3:12 a.m. The door slammed so hard the mirror shook. Frank was shaking. Not with fear. With rage. The kind of rage that only comes from loving someone who won't let you save them. What the hell was that, Dean? What the hell are you doing out there? Dean sat in the corner, still in his tuxedo, tie loosened, eyes empty. He didn't look at Frank. He looked at the wall, at the mirror, at nothing. He didn't answer. "We have 23 more cities." 23. You think you can just? Frank grabbed a plate from the catering table. Spaghetti. Cold. Congealed. Red sauce that had been sitting there for hours. He threw it. The pasta hit the mirror behind Dean's head. Red sauce dripped down the glass like blood. The plate shattered on the floor. Dean didn't flinch, didn't wipe it off, didn't even blink. Lorraine Chen, the backstage server, stood frozen in the doorway. She was 23 years old. She had Mr. Sinatra's usual Jack Daniels, 2 ice cubes, no water balanced on a tray. Her hands were shaking. Dean looked at her. In that moment something shifted. The empty eyes flickered. The mask slipped, just for a second, and underneath it Lorraine saw something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Not the king of cool, not Dino, not the drunk with the easy smile, just a father who had buried his son. "Sweetheart," Dean said quietly. His voice was gentle. "You got any apple juice?" Lorraine couldn't move, couldn't speak. Frank was still screaming, pacing, throwing his hands in the air. But Dean just looked at her with those empty eyes and waited. I can check," she whispered. For 41 minutes, Dean sat in that chair, pasta sauce drying on his jacket, Frank pacing, screaming, pleading, Sammy standing in the corner, trying to make peace. Finally, at 6:15 a.m., Dean spoke. "I want to go home, Frank. Home. We have a tour, Dean. We have contracts. We have obligations. You have a tour." Dean stood up slowly. His knees cracked. "I'm done." Frank's voice cracked. The rage melted into something desperate. "Dino, please, I'm trying to help you." Dean looked at his oldest friend, the man who had saved him in 1952, the man who had believed in him when nobody else did, and he whispered the truth. "Grief doesn't take encores." Frank stepped back. His face crumbled. 40 years of friendship, and he had never heard Dean sound like that. Never heard that emptiness, that finality. March 21, 1988, exactly 1 year since his son died. Dean Martin walked out of the Chicago theater, got into a waiting car, headed for the airport. Bobby Marchetti heard about it 3 days later. A stagehand from Chicago called him. "You won't believe what happened," the guy said. And then he told Bobby what Dean whispered as he walked out of the theater. 40 years later, Bobby would still remember those 4 words. He said, "I buried him twice." Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Los Angeles. 2 days later. The official diagnosis: kidney infection. The real diagnosis: a soul that had finally given up pretending. "Cancel the tour," Frank told Elliot Weissman on the phone. His voice was flat, defeated. "All of it. $14 million in ticket sales, 23 cities, contracts signed. I don't care about contracts. If we cancel, everyone loses everything." Frank slammed his hand against the wall. "Then find someone else." The call went out that night. Liza Minnelli, Oscar winner, Judy Garland's daughter, together again became the ultimate event. The tour continued. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't the Rat Pack. April 29, 1988. Bally's Hotel Casino, Las Vegas. Dean was back on stage, solo, small room, the intimate setting he had always preferred. Tommy DeLuca had been bartending at Bally's for 15 years. He had served Dean more drinks, more apple juice if he was being honest, than he could count. He knew the rhythms, the jokes, the way Dean's eyes would scan the room like he was looking for someone who wasn't there. "Frank sent me a kidney," Dean told the crowd, "but I didn't know whose it was." They laughed. Dean laughed too, that famous smile, that easy charm. But Tommy saw the truth. He was close enough to see it. His eyes weren't laughing. Tommy would tell his grandchildren decades later. His eyes were already gone, like he was a record that kept playing after the song was over. One quiet night, after the show, Dean sat alone at the bar. Tommy poured his usual apple juice, no ice. "Tommy," Dean said quietly, "I've been dead for a year. I just forgot to lie down." Tommy didn't know what to say, so he just stood there and listened. "My boy used to come to these shows, used to sit right there." Dean pointed at an empty table near the stage. "And now he's gone. And I'm still here. And I don't know why." By 1989, the story seemed complete. The ultimate event tour had made millions. Frank and Sammy and Liza had filled arenas across the country. And Dean Martin had retreated to his Beverly Hills home, watching old westerns, waiting for something that would never come, or so everyone thought. But Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin never performed together again. Not once. After Chicago, after the cigarette, after Grief Doesn't Take Encores, something broke between them. Not the friendship that survived, barely in phone calls and Christmas cards. But the magic was gone. The thing that had made them the Rat Pack had died on that Oakland stage. May 16, 1990, Sammy Davis Jr. died. Throat cancer. 64 years old. At the funeral, Frank and Dean stood side by side. They didn't speak much. There wasn't much left to say. In Steubenville, they had taught Dean to work through pain. The steel mills didn't stop for broken bones. You showed up, you did your job, you smiled through the agony. But they never taught him how to fight grief, because grief doesn't fight fair, and grief doesn't take encores. We all try to save the people we love. We plan tours. We make phone calls. We throw plates against walls. We all believe that going back can heal what we've become, that the old magic still works, that the songs we used to sing together can fix the silence. We all eventually learn that some stages are too big for broken hearts. 365 days since his son died, 6 shows completed, 40 years of friendship, 29 cities that would never see them together, 1 cigarette, encores. Christmas Day 1995. The kind he used to make. The official cause was acute respiratory failure. The real cause was a broken heart that had been breaking for 8 years. Since a mountain in California. Since a cigarette in Oakland. Since the night he learned that grief doesn't take encores. Lorraine Chen never forgot that night in Chicago. She left the hospitality business, went back to school, became a grief counselor, spent 30 years helping people who had lost children. "That look in his eyes," she said. "He taught me that sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the heaviest weight." Bobby Marchetti kept mixing sound until 2003, but he never worked another Rat Pack show. Never wanted to. He kept a copy of the Oakland setlist pinned to his studio wall, the one that ended halfway through. "Every time I mix a show now," he told an interviewer in 2015, "I watch the monitors. I watch the eyes, because sometimes the sound isn't the problem. Sometimes the silence is louder than anything coming through the speakers." Tommy DeLuca still tells the story. Every time someone orders apple juice at his grandson's bar, he wasn't drunk. He was never drunk. He was just tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of being the guy who made everyone else feel better when he couldn't feel anything at all. The cigarette from Oakland was never found, but Patricia Novak, the woman in the red dress, a secretary from Fremont who had saved for 6 months, kept her ticket stub, framed it. "I was there the night it ended," she tells People, "and all it took was one cigarette.